Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into an explainer on a topic that is practically inescapable right now. It's dominating tech headlines, boardrooms, and honestly, probably soon our daily lives. We are looking at the metaverse. But we aren't here to look at those glossy, brightly colored marketing pitches we've all been bombarded with. Instead, we're putting on our documentary journalist hats today. We are relying purely on the data, the research, and the underlying architecture to impartially unpack the reality hiding behind that virtual curtain. Because we have to ask, what actually happens when we move our lives, our economies, and our identities into persistent virtual worlds? Well, let's find out.
Just look at that question. What happens when our avatars actually have less protection than we do in the physical world? It's intense, right? The metaverse is so often sold to us as this fun, cartoonish, infinite playground, a place of totally limitless connection. But the source material we're examining today documents a series of very serious, completely unprecedented risks that are currently vastly outpacing the safeguards designed to protect us.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to keep this highly logical and systematically compartmentalize these threats. First, we'll look beyond the virtual hype, then dig into unprecedented data privacy risks, tackle virtual harassment and safety, look at the psychological toll, break down corporate monopolies and control, and finally, wrap up with navigating the virtual future. Let's get right into it.
All right, part 1, Beyond the Virtual Hype. Breaking down the illusion versus the reality.
There is a massive core disconnect here. On one side, you've got the marketed metaverse, right? Smiling avatars, flawless, seamless transitions, and totally sanitized environments. But on the flip side, the reality of the back-end architecture is a dense, incredibly complex web of data nodes, server requests, and continuous user tracking. The source material emphasizes a crucial point. This back-end isn't just hosting a world. It's actively monitoring it at a level of granularity we have literally never seen before. The real threat models, they exist right here in the invisible architecture. Which leads us perfectly into Section 2, Unprecedented Data Privacy Risks. We are moving from clicks to heartbeats.
To really grasp this, we've got to lock down this specific term, biometric inferencing. Essentially, it's the continuous tracking and analysis of your subconscious physical responses. Think about it. To render a VR world properly, the headset has to know exactly where your eyes are looking, how your body is moving, even your physiological reactions. We're talking capturing thousands of data points a minute. And the kicker? That exact same data, your pupil dilation, your gait, your heart rate, can be analyzed to predict your emotional state and what you're going to do next with stunning accuracy.
Let's put that abstract threat into a tangible perspective. Think about how you're tracked right now in Web 2.0. Companies track what you click, how long you watch a video, maybe your GPS location. Sure, it feels a bit intrusive, but it is conscious behavior. Now look at Web 3.0 in the metaverse tracking. We're talking pupil dilation, how your weight shifts when you walk, your actual pulse, and facial micro-expressions. Standard web cookies completely pale in comparison to this kind of biometric data mining. It is no longer about what you do online. It's about how your body reacts on a purely subconscious level.
When you map out these invisible vulnerabilities, it's pretty eye-opening. Every single sensor on a VR rig, the cameras mapping out your living room, the inward-facing sensors watching your eyes, the haptic controllers picking up micro-tremors in your hands, they all act like a giant intake valve for this data. And the report notes, very impartially, that stepping into these persistent environments requires surrendering a level of bodily privacy that our current legal frameworks simply do not account for yet.
Now we need to shift our narrative from those invisible data risks to the highly visible, visceral impacts on human safety. Section 3 covers virtual harassment and safety, where digital threats begin to feel incredibly real.
What's really interesting and honestly alarming is when we translate those abstract complaints into hard data. The severity and frequency of reported incidents across the major platforms is incredibly high. We aren't just talking about a mean comment in a text chat anymore. We're looking at a high frequency of spatial and physical harassment. Users are literally having their personal 3D space violated. I mean, imagine the visceral reaction of someone virtually whispering right into your physical ear, and you literally can't physically step away from them. That is the actual reality users are navigating.
I want to read this quote straight from the source text exactly as it's written, because it just perfectly captures the human element of these safety failures. The immersive nature of VR bypasses the brain's rational filters. When an avatar is assaulted in a virtual space, the somatic responses, elevated heart rate, adrenaline spikes, and psychological trauma are identical to a physical world encounter.
Let that sink in for a second. It's a sobering reality. The technology is so incredibly effective at tricking your brain that the trauma registered is practically physical.
And that somatic response brings us right into Section 4, the psychological toll, or essentially losing touch with reality.
As users spend hours or even days in these persistent environments, the risk factors skew heavily toward severe digital addiction metrics and psychological dissociation. Because the immersive nature of the metaverse makes the off-ramp back to the real world incredibly steep, the text specifically highlights deep concerns for developing minds. Prolonged exposure can really blur those cognitive boundaries between real-world consequences and virtual actions. It leaves users with a profound sense of derealization the minute they finally take that headset off.
It gets even more complicated when you introduce the concept of the digital twin. What happens is users increasingly compartmentalize their identities. They create these highly idealized avatars that live out entirely separate social and economic lives, and that drives pretty severe identity fragmentation. Sure, it offers absolutely incredible creative freedom, but the report notes it also builds this massive psychological gap between who the user is in the real world and their virtual perfection. And that gap, it's a primary driver for the exact psychological distress and dissociation we were just talking about.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit for Section 5, corporate monopolies and control. If the data is this valuable and the environment is this psychologically gripping, we need to ask who actually owns the metaverse.
Tracking this over the last few years, we've seen a remarkably rapid, chronological consolidation of power. It's not just about acquiring software. It's the foundational VR infrastructure that's being bought up. We're talking server space, cloud computing capabilities, the actual hardware manufacturing. It's essentially a massive land grab by a very small handful of legacy tech players who are positioning themselves to literally own the roads and bridges of the virtual world. Which sets up a fascinating paradox. The metaverse was originally championed as Web3, right? This decentralized utopia where you own your data and your assets. But look at what's actually facing immediate, strict centralization. Cloud hosting, hardware access, digital economies, identity verification. The utopian promise of a decentralized web is actively being monopolized. Impartially speaking, the architecture just requires such massive capital and immense server power that only these megacorporations are actually capable of hosting it. And when you patiently trace exactly how the data ownership flows, a pretty startling picture emerges. It starts right down at the bottom with your biometric inputs. Then it funnels up through whatever specific platform you're using, moves right into the cloud infrastructure hosting that platform, and ultimately pools into the proprietary databases of these major monopolistic entities. It's honestly a masterclass in vertical integration. The very corporation that sells you the headset is also the one owning the server, hosting the virtual world, and analyzing your subconscious data. All right, turning the corner now. Having anatomized the threat, we pivot to Section 6, navigating the virtual future, focusing on solutions and safeguards.
The source material doesn't just leave us with the doom and gloom, it gives us a constructive roadmap forward. Here are the actionable takeaways you really need to remember. First up, macro level. Policymakers absolutely must establish regulatory frameworks specifically tailored for biometric inferencing because our current laws are just totally unequipped for it. Second, technologists need to champion privacy by design. That means demanding this highly sensitive data is processed locally right on your device, not beamed up to the cloud. And finally, user vigilance. You have to understand your haptic boundaries, know exactly how to isolate your avatar on a dime, and fully grasp exactly what you are trading in exchange for access.
Which brings us to a final, pretty profound question to chew on based on everything we've explored today. Considering all the biometric tracking, the psychological impacts, and the unprecedented corporate consolidation, are we building a digital utopia, or are we willingly constructing our own gilded cage? It is definitely something we all need to answer before we strap that headset on. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and I'll catch you in the next one.